Hey everyone, welcome to the new channel. The purpose of this channel is to encourage you to exercise, and I will be talking about the Bible and Bible-related things as we exercise together. I want to encourage you to take 12 minutes out of your day to exercise, whether it's walking on a treadmill or jogging, if it's lifting weights, whatever your exercise of choice is, just take 12 minutes, give yourself 12 minutes a day to do that, and I'll be there right along with you via this YouTube channel, this podcast, and I'll be sharing some thoughts on the Bible with you. So that's what we'll be doing together. I'm going to go ahead and start my timer right now, and we'll start chatting. All right, so here we go, 12 minutes. I'm going to bump it up to level 4 on my treadmill. So I'm going to do some jogging. You don't have to jog, do whatever you want to do. So a Bible verse that I've been thinking about is in John chapter 13. I think it's John chapter 13, verse 34. It's where right after Jesus has told Judas to go and do what you're going to do. It's the scene of the Lord's Supper. And Jesus tells his disciples that he is about to be glorified, that he's going to a place that they cannot go. And in, I believe it's verse 34, Jesus tells his disciples, "A new commandment I give you, to love one another just as I love you. All people will know that you are my disciples by the love that you have for one another." So I've been thinking about that verse for the past week or so, and pulling it apart and really getting down to what it means, and am I living according to this commandment that Jesus gave those 11 apostles at the Lord's Supper. Now, Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you, to love one another." But he doesn't stop right there. He says, "Love one another as I have loved you." So we have to keep that in mind, that in a world, in a time where we try to define love for what we think it is, or create our own template of what it should look like to love people, Christ has already given his followers that template, and it is himself. He told the apostles, "Love as I have loved you." So it follows that we need to take a moment and really consider, in reading scripture, how was it that Jesus loved the apostles? What example did he give them? Because that is the way that we should love one another and love others. We also, I think it's reasonable to tie that to what Jesus said when some of his critics were talking to him about the law, and he said, "The greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And second to this, or equal, is to love your neighbor as yourself." So Christ has given us that template of what it means to love. It's up to us to go through scripture and really discover through the reading of scripture and meditation to find out, how is it that Christ loved? See, we can go at it again as being those who say, "Well, I'm going to love in this way, and I determine what love looks like." But we don't get to do that. If we are followers of Christ, we can't do that, because he has said to love as he loved. Also, furthermore, in scripture it says that God is love. So for anyone who thinks they are loving by their own design, and it is contrary to the character of God and the activity and will of God, then that love isn't love at all. So that's what I've been thinking about. That verse continues on where Jesus says, all people will know that you're my disciples because of the love you have for one another. I love theology. I love studying theology and getting to the weeds of it all. But the world isn't going to know us by our theology. The world is going to know that we are Christ's disciples by how we love each other now. Yes, correct theology will inform us how to love one another. But even if you know that theology, but you're not living it out, it doesn't really matter. Now I'm thinking about what James says, show me your faith by your works. I'm going to slow this down. James says to show me your faith by your works. So when we consider the text in John chapter 13, I believe again, I think it's verse 34 to 35. Christ wants us to live a life of love. I believe it's Kenneth Boa who said that we should love God completely, love ourselves correctly, and love others compassionately. Again, love God completely, love yourself correctly, and love others compassionately. So those are my thoughts on that verse. I believe, again, it's John chapter 13, verses 34 through 35. Take some time to go and read that passage. Something else that's been on my mind is the book of Exodus. We got about 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Come on, let's stay strong and finish this strong. So with my local church and our community group or in our small group, we've been going through the book of Exodus. I'm going to speed this up real quick. We've been going through the book of Exodus, and today we found ourselves in Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12 is the introduction of the Passover. Jesus is explaining to Moses and Aaron from verses 1 through 20 on how to observe the Passover. And he explains to them what's going to happen and why it's going to happen. And Moses and Aaron are to take this instruction and inform the Israelites. Well, as we were discussing it this morning, I made it a point to share with the community group that it's a difficult text. Much of Exodus, I believe, is difficult in as far as it is to understand it at times, but also once you understand it, to how do I put this? When you really understand what the text is saying, it may cause you to wrestle with a preconceived notion you have of God, because the Passover is tied in to the 10th plague, where the firstborn of all the Egyptians die. And if you're honest, that's a difficult text to read. As I mentioned earlier, I really like getting into the weeds of Scripture. So much like, what does this word mean? Why was hyssop used to spread the blood of the lamb on the lintel, the door frame of the Israelites' home? But sometimes we can get so deep into the woods that we miss the miss the forest for the trees. I think overall, I'm going to slow down. I think overall, as we read Exodus, we can't lose the big picture. That is that God is saving his people from slavery These plagues came about because of the stubbornness of Pharaoh and the sovereignty, primarily the sovereignty of God. I can't remember what verse it is, somewhere in between verses 1 and 20 of chapter 12 of Exodus. God says that in this 10th plague, in the death of the firstborn of all the Egyptians, that it is judgment on Pharaoh. It is judgment on the nation of Israel. Judgment on the nation of Egypt. And it is judgment on the gods of Egypt. So while Exodus may be difficult to read, especially the 10 plagues, we have to keep in mind the sovereignty of God and the might of God. That these plagues were to show Pharaoh that Pharaoh is no God. And he, God, Yahweh, enacted these plagues on Egypt to show the Egyptians that their deities didn't stand a chance against Yahweh. He was proving to the Egyptians who he was. Because if you remember, when Moses and Aaron first appear in the courtroom of Pharaoh, they say Yahweh has said to let his people go so that they may worship in the wilderness. And Pharaoh's response was, I don't know who this Yahweh is. Pretty much, I've never heard of him, or I don't care who he is. So then goes the story of Pharaoh's stubbornness. Again, as we read any text in the Bible, we have to remember the overarching theme of the book and theme of the Bible that is about Jesus saving his people, redeeming his people, ultimately through his sacrifice on the cross and his resurrection. And in that we have hope that he will return. So Exodus and the Passover Lamb points forward to Jesus, and the sacrifice and resurrection of Jesus points back to the Exodus, because Jesus is the final sacrifice, as the book of Hebrews tells us that he is our Passover Lamb. So again, while I think it's good for us to dig into the details, that's 12 minutes. If you reach 12 minutes, congratulations. So while I think it's important and beneficial to dig into the details of the text, let's not miss the forest for the trees. And let's look at the overarching story of whatever biblical book it is that we're reading. And Exodus is about Christ, is about God, Yahweh, saving his people from the bondage of Egypt and bringing them into the promise. And that points forward to the New Testament of Jesus saving all people from the bondage of sin and death and bringing us into his promise of salvation, and ultimately into the promise of his eternal presence when heaven and earth become one. So thank you for exercising with me. I hope you got a good sweat, and just go out and do it. Give yourself 12 minutes a day, whether you're joining me and listening along as I talk about Bible stuff, or you're doing it in silence. Just give yourself 12 minutes a day. God bless. Hey everyone, thank you for working out with me today. I hope this video and this workout was a blessing to you in mind, body, and soul.